My guest is Casey Corcoran, who's VP of Strategy for 4V. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you.
So tell us about 4V and your cyber risk product.
So 4V System is a subsidiary of SRC Corporation out of Syracuse, New York. SRC was in the business of running a secure operations center for a government agency for a number of years. Well, one of the questions that was asked frequently was, how secure are we? Right? Mm-hmm. It was a network that was substantial, had about 50,000 devices in it, about 400 different locations. And the answer that came out of that was always, well, it's this many events on the firewall, 8 million of those, right? Or it was something like, we are at 68% of this. It was almost some kind of statistic that didn't really describe what was happening in terms of the risk. So based on that, the leadership team sent them away and said, give us a better answer. We really want to know what's happening here. So they came back and they did a metadata analysis. I'm getting jargony here now, but I'll try to explain that, on all of this security data to come up with risk factors. And the idea there is, when I go to the doctor, he doesn't do a DNA analysis right away, right? What he does is he takes my blood pressure, maybe my cholesterol and things like that, but he gets maybe eight data points that give you a pretty good indication how healthy I am. And if I told you those 8 data points, you'd say, hey, Casey, you're doing pretty good, or you better go get on the treadmill, right? Mm-hmm. But in cybersecurity, I could spend 8 hours, you would have no idea how healthy my network is, right? Because we do everything at that very granular geneticist level. So what they learned by doing this over years was that they could boil all of this information up using some fancy algorithms into cyber risk indicators. And that's what we're producing right now, cyber risk indicators that will tell you in about 5 seconds what the health status of your cyber security infrastructure is.
Wow, so I need to drill deeper to
Sure.
understand that because, because risk is often about unknowns.
It is.
Right? So you could be, it could be the day before, some Chinese hacking group decides they're going to take you down.
That's very true. So what we're really doing is if you look at the way most risk indicators work, right? And a lot of people are putting risk dashboards up today, and I think some are valid and some aren't. But if you look at it from the outside, you're looking at what is the potential of being attacked, let's say from the outside in, which is an important, are the barbarians at the gate or not is an important factor in what you're going to do with your gate. However, it doesn't tell you what's actually happening inside your network. So what we're trying to do is, instead of looking at it from a readiness perspective, which is what that view is, like, is my infrastructure secure? Have I done all the compliance? That's fine. That tells me how ready I am to fight the battle. What we're doing is we're saying, you're already in the middle of the battle. You always are, right? Mm-hmm. Your own employees will do that to you. How are your systems performing, and what are they telling you about what's happening inside during the battle? And that's a different type of risk that we're looking at. It's the risk of not performing versus a risk of not being breached.
Got it.
Yeah.
So what kind of data do you collect, and how do you collect it?
We collect very much the same data that a SIM would use, a GRC would use, identity management systems would use, right? We kind of go across all those people, processes, and technology. We try to bring all of these things together and then boil those down into maybe a 10% subset of the total data volume. Most companies that we're targeting, in the mid to large range, already have a log aggregator that's doing a big amount of that. So we take that data and then we pull up the other data from the other systems as we need them.
Okay. And then how do you do the algorithmically decide what's
the secret sauce, right?
The secret sauce.
Yeah,
Where's the scoring come from?
Well, the scoring comes from the experience that we had with SRC initially had with that government agency that did that for. They matured these models, these cyber risk indicators over about 6 years. And really from the perspective of, when I do something that should increase my risk, does it actually, right? So really going back and saying, hey, if I open up all the ports on my firewall, well then obviously my risk should go up. And it does, right? Our scores do show that. But more interestingly, we have seen things like a vulnerability scan hits every sensor, as it should, and it makes your risk go through the roof. But what happens right after a vulnerability scan is your IT people get busy plugging the holes that were found. And what we can see when they do that is that before the vulnerability scan and after vulnerability scan, there'll be a 5-point difference where things get less risky because they've closed the holes. Mm-hmm. So it's really very empirical, what works and what doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, we'll tweak the algorithm until it gets there. Right now, we think we've got an initial set of algorithms, initial model, that approximates those cyber risk indicators. It's probably a flawed model. All models are. That's why they're models. However, we think it's a useful model that we can refine going forward.
Yeah, because I'm finding the value from doing any sort of continuous risk evaluation is your ability to show improvement.
Exactly.
Right? And that's what the executives are looking for.
Or patterns even, right?
Yeah.
So one of the very interesting things you start seeing is people think of risk as a static thing. Not everybody, but generally, right? It's a perimeter defense type thing. If I keep everybody out, then I don't have risk. Well, that's not true. What's really true is our networks are almost as complex as an organism, as a living organism these days. It's a system of systems, and it's an ebbing and flowing of risk. It's not a static, my risk is this. So if you look at the score that we produce, what you'll see on a weekend, it'll be a 90. Monday morning at about 8 o'clock, guess what? It starts ticking down because people start coming to work and do things that create events on the network, which then through our mathematics turned into the risk score. But it's just as simple as when you click on a link in an email, if it's going to the wrong website, that is going to do something to your risk profile. That pattern is regular. It happens every day. You can see it from 8 in the morning until, let's say, 5 in the evening, and then it goes back to a steady state. You see a weekly pattern, so an hourly, a daily, a weekly, a monthly, a quarterly, because your business rhythm is really what drives the risk patterns. Where we'll be able to get to eventually is what is a normal Monday, right? So maybe on a Monday at 3 o'clock, it's always a 60. And that's because of whatever your operational rhythm is. Well, then you shouldn't go crazy because you're at a 60. It's a normal. Whereas if Monday at 3 o'clock you're at a 30, you may want to worry about it, right? But don't worry about something that's normal, right? So those covariance analysis and those statistical analysis is what our index allows you to do.
You've probably had enough experience with user or customer use cases by now that you've got somebody who's doing a great job and they've reduced their vulnerabilities, tightened up their firewalls, reduced the number of logs. So they think they're doing great.
Right.
And then a black swan occurs, which happens in
Of course it does.
cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're called into the board of directors. And you said we were doing great last week. Why did we just get breached?
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that's just a reality. Just because your vital signs are good doesn't mean you won't get cancer. And we're not trying to solve cancer with this. What we're trying to do is give the security practitioners a measure of confidence that what they're doing is providing a base level of security in such a ways that they can actually communicate it. Now, the cancer finders out there exist, right? Your SIM systems, your strong correlation engines, those are all about finding that really pointy needle in this huge haystack. Those don't go away. We're just giving you another way to look at this, which doesn't force you to look at a stack of needles every day, which is really hard to get through. It allows you to very simply have a look and see, hey, are things basically where they should be right now? And if they're off, where do I need to go look, right? So from our high-level index down to the cyber risk indicator, down to the part of the network that drove the change in the risk, down to the actual sensor that drove that, is 3 clicks. At that point, we say, okay, now you're close enough. Now you have all these other systems that you're using already that you've tuned to do this, be it a BI solution, whatever it is, that'll get you right to what is that sharp needle. So we're hoping that we can actually inform that black swan before the black swan happens. In the end, you can't protect from everything.
Right. Do you expect to eventually have enough customer base, I guess, to start providing benchmark comparisons?
You've been reading ahead, haven't you? Yes, absolutely. So once you have, say 20, 30 customers in the same industry of the same size, same type of operation, much as in the financial industry, you start having comparables. And those comparables are very powerful because right now what's happening is the comparable is a standard. It's either a compliance standard in the retail sector, for example, a PCI, or it's some sort of a control standard. And those are what everybody's comparing themselves to. Well, I'm implementing NIST, I'm implementing this or that or the other. The problem is you don't really know whether that vast array of controls that you're implementing is effectively reducing your risk. You just know that from a best practice perspective, it should be. What we're hoping to do is give you a measure of when I go implement this control, the average organization sees a 4% drop in risk, right? So we can actually start racking and stacking the controls and saying, hey, based on the experience of all of our customers, we take anonymized data, obviously. Yeah. We can tell you that you should probably be doing controls 42 and 82A right now because those will get you where you want to go.
I like that.
Yeah.
So what about the in the supply chain, are you finding that maybe a big OEM who's assembling a lot of components or working with a lot of suppliers wants that visibility into them as well?
Right. So, yes, and the ability to do that, we're calling that the risk plus minus score. If you're familiar with sports plus minus scores, right? When in ice hockey, when you have a player on the ice, you have a score that basically says, is he helping the team or not helping the team? It doesn't matter how many goals he shoots or anything like that. It's really how, on average, does the team perform when that player is on the ice. We have a risk plus minus score, where it says, when Casey is on the network, is it increasing my risk or decreasing my risk? And the idea there is you start scoring individuals based on their presence and their activities on the network, not necessarily digging into everything they're doing, but looking at what's happening to the score when they're there, right? Because that's more telling. And then you take that from the individual and you bring it up to an organization. So now I've got a supplier who has a dozen people who I have to let into my networks. Well, how does that change my risk profile? Does it allow me to stay at my agreed channel markers of between 80 and 90, let's say? If it doesn't, then I need to do something about that supplier. And I can enforce upon the supplier that you need to be between an 80 and 90, otherwise you can't do business with me. So it does give you that objective way of looking at risk across the two different networks.
So, yeah, I've heard of risk dashboards, and there are plenty of companies that at least take vulnerability scans and compare them to firewall logs, and they've tried to make a business out of that. How often, when you go into a customer or prospect, do you find that you're replacing or displacing some other risk platform?
We don't think we'll replace or displace them. I think what we'll be able to do is show another way of using them. So I refer to the SIM systems, the GRC systems. What we are doing really is you're pointing you to the place where the change in behavior, whether it's a people, process, or technology, is happening right now, so that you can use these other tools and focus them on the right areas. So another type of scoring, another risk indicator that we're building is a defense and depth indicator. That really says, if I have multiple networks and they're protected with IPSs and IDSs and firewalls and different layers, I should probably not be seeing any events from that downstream endpoint because it's protected through 9 different layers, which is good. Except I'm probably overprotecting it, because if I don't see any events, but I'm seeing a lot over here, then I'm probably light here and heavy over here. That's an opportunity to actually optimize the configuration and say, I need to shift some of those resources over to the other areas. So we don't see this as displacing it, any more so than the vital signs display DNA analysis or an MRI. It's just another way of getting to the right tool to actually do that detail analysis quicker.
What's a deployment look like? Is it pretty?
Currently, so our brand promises that you'll get your first index, which will give you an actual value in 30 days. So it's fairly fast. We are cloud deployed in our first release. Our second release, we're planning on being able to do on-premises deployment as well. A lot of it is dependent on whether the data sources are available. If they are, and most companies these days have the data, it's just a matter of getting it pulled into the system. And if you already have a log aggregator, it's pretty low key.
Great. So what's next, and what didn't I ask?
Well, what's next after that, of course, is the ability to take this. We ever talk about kind of putting a benchmark together for an industry. Being able to inform the insurance risk transfer calculation, I think, is a very, very important aspect to what we're doing. Insurance underwriting is a very haphazard thing right now in cybersecurity, because nobody knows how to really measure the risk that's happening within a network. It's more about a limiting liability than it is about actual IT risk or risk due to IT operations. Once we have something that everybody believes is a fairly good representation of what that is, we think we can actually allow the CFO or the chief risk officer to make that trade-off between accepting risk, putting it in the backlog, transferring that risk to an insurance company, or managing that risk through technology or people, processes, or training, whatever it is, in a very intelligent way, right? Versus right now, which is kind of throw everything at it and hope it doesn't happen, right? And then after that, there's, who knows where that takes it, because once you're managing risk in a very measurable way, there's risk arbitrage, there's lots of different horizons that you can start steering towards.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Casey.
Thank you.